Has America's enemy number one become its friend number two? I'm talking about China. The ties between the two superpowers seem to be thawing. And why am I saying that? Due to the recent events. Let's break them down for you. Chinese President Xi Jinping and the US President Joe Biden are set to meet later this month, remember, in San Francisco, and this would be at the upcoming Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum Summit. The last time the two leaders met face-to-face was in November 2022. In the run-up to the expected bilateral, several other high-level meetings between Chinese and American diplomats are taking place. And this week, the U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen will meet her Chinese counterpart in San Francisco. Yellen would be hosting the Chinese Vice Premier for 2 days, and the two are expected to discuss several issues. This includes America's concerns about unfair Chinese economic practices and the potential areas for cooperation like climate change, debt relief. Now, this comes 4 months after Yellen traveled to Beijing to meet the Premier Li Qiang and the Vice Premier, who assumed responsibility for the Chinese economy in March. Now, only days ago, Wang Yi was on a 3-day visit to Washington, remember, and there he met with the President, Joe Biden, as well as the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, and the National Security Advisor. The ministers discussed military exchanges between the US and China, and they also talked about the crises in West Asia and Ukraine. You see, when the Trump administration was in power, a trade war broke out between the US and China, and that is not all. There was also a war of words between the two sides. And since then, the ties have only soured. China's spy balloons and America's restrictions on its investments in China have made matters worse. And the US has steadily expanded sanctions against the Chinese companies, mainly due to national security and human rights concerns. But the fact of the matter is, the US needs to work closely with China now. And why is that? Reason number one, due to Beijing's close ties with West Asia. Traditionally, you see, China has focused on economic engagement with the Arab world, but in recent months, it has been more than willing to mediate regional conflicts. Earlier in the year, China brokered the Saudi-Iran normalization agreement, and this highlighted the dragon's growing influence in West Asia. Beijing has also shown interest in de-escalating the Israel-Palestine crisis and renewing the Iran nuclear agreement. Other than diplomacy, China and the US need to be on good terms for the sake of their economies. Even though the superpowers are locked in an intense economic competition, they together represent 40% of the global output. They remain integral partners in multiple ways. They sell and buy important products from each other. They finance each other's businesses and develop apps for each other. Not to forget, they provide a home to millions of each other's people. China is America's third largest trading partner after Canada and Mexico. US imports of goods and services from China hit a record high last year. Not just that, back in 2021, US exports to China supported nearly 1.1 million jobs in the country. The diplomatic ties between the two countries frayed, but now it looks like China is returning from out of the cold. And as we speak about that, Australia and China also have made a huge announcement. The Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese met with the President Xi Jinping, advocated for increasing high-level interactions between the two sides, and this includes the revival of the annual Leaders' Dialogue. He also extended an invitation to Xi Jinping for a visit to Australia. You see, it's not just the US. Another AUKUS partner is warming up to China. Is this a diplomatic victory for the dragon? WION now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the updates on the move.